Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Yud Gimel. We didn't quite get as far as I had hoped yesterday, so we're at the Mishnah, the first Mishnah on Yud Betam and Bet, and we'll just dive right in. We're actually going to finish today the second chapter of Maseches Makkot and begin the third chapter. The second chapter has dealt with exile, where somebody kills somebody by accident and then has to go to an exiled city. And so we will finish that topic and we will turn to the third chapter, which will deal with the topic of why this Masechet is called Makkot, which is lashes. So we'll deal with that as well today. So Harag Ba'osa Ha'ir, if somebody kills somebody in the city of refuge, so then Gola Mishchuna Lashchuna, he has to go from one community, one neighborhood in the city to another because he can't stay in because he requires some kind of exile, and yet he can't leave the city because the avenger for the first person that he killed is going to want to take revenge on him if he leaves the city and may try to kill him. Uven Levi, and when it comes to somebody from who's a Levi who lives in the city full time and is not a resident because it's a city of exile, but rather is a resident because that happens to be his home base, Gola Me'ir Le'ir. Well, then he needs to leave the city because he can leave the city initially. So he would leave the city and be exiled to a different city. So, Tana Rabbanan, V'samti L'cha Makom, right? I'm going to set a place for you. This is a pasuk. This is Shmo Kaf Aleph pasuk Yud Gimel. And this is the Torah telling us that there's going to be a place for somebody to flee. V'samti L'cha B'chayecha, right? So now this is, in your lifetime, Moshe, it is saying that he would have the opportunity to do it. And in fact, although this was said in Shmot, when it comes to Sefer Dvarim, we will see that in fact Moshe went ahead and set aside the 3 cities of refuge on the eastern side of the Jordan. Makom, so place, mimkomcha, in your place, meaning that it's going to be just as Moshe is a Levi and lives in Machaneh Leviyah, the second camp around, the first camp around the tabernacle, right? The tabernacle was the Kodesh HaKodeshim, or the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and then around that was was Machaneh Leviim, and then Machaneh Yisrael was around that. So it was in Machaneh Leviah, Asher Yanu Shama, and that's the place where people are going to flee. Milamed Shahayu Yisrael Maglin B'Midbar. This shows that even in the desert, people would get exiled if they were killed by accident. So Laheken Maglin, where would they get exiled to? L'Machaneh Leviah. So they would get exiled to the Levite camp. So Mikan Amru Ben Levi Shahara Gola Mipelach Lepelach. And so a Levi would go from one city to one area to another area. Vimgala Lefilko Pilko Kolto. But if he went into exile in his own city, just to a different neighborhood, so then it would still provide some level of refuge. Amravacha Breda Ravaika Maikra. What's the pasuk that shows that this is in fact true? Kiva miklato yeshev. He must dwell in his city of refuge. Ir shikala taso kvar. It's a city that has already afforded him refuge, meaning that if the way that we're reading this pasuk is that he must dwell in his city of refuge, the city of refuge that has already provided him refuge. So that teaches us that if somebody were to kill somebody by accident a second time, so then they would stay in their city. They would and just go to a different neighborhood. Okay, so Kiyotzibo. So again, back into the Mishnah, I think this is the last Mishnah last Mishnah in the second parak. And so Kayotzibo, similarly, Rotzeach Shigala Le'ir Miklato, if a killer is exiled to a city of refuge, Viratzu Anshe Ha'ir Lekabdo, and they want to honor him. The residents of the city want to honor him. Yomer lahem rotzeachani. He needs to tell them, listen, I'm a killer. I'm not worthy of being honored because I killed somebody by accident. It just again highlights how severe the Jewish religion feels that even killing somebody by accident should be. So Amru lo, so that, and if they say to him, listen, Apal Pikain, we want to honor you anyway. Yikaba mehen. Well, then he's allowed to accept the honor. Shneamar b'zed dvar harotzeach, as we have seen before, although it literally means this is the matter of the rotzeach, of the killer by accident, and then it discusses the various laws. Zed dvar harotzeach is that this is the word of the killer, and so what this is teaching, the way this the Tana in this Mishnah is reading it, is zed dvar harotzeach, is that the murderer needs to sometimes speak up and identify himself. And so this is what it's saying, that the murderer, the killer has to accidental killer has to identify himself, and then he'll be able to, and once he does that, then if they want to still honor him, he can still be honored. So as we turn to Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Mahalin Ayu Schar L'Levim, and so the simple read, take a look at Rashi at the top of the Rashi, first Rashi on Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, Ha'arim, that the cities, Sachar L'Levim, Sherotzchim, Sokrim Mehem. So the Levium would rent it to the murderers who would rent it from them as bate hadira, in order to find a place to live. So the bottom line is that it wasn't necessarily, the city was owned by Levium, and they would rent out space as necessary to those who killed by accident. So Divrei Rebbe Yehuda, that's what Rebbe Yehuda says. Tosfos has a slightly different view. Ma'alim hayu sachar Leviim, perish rotzkim habaim v'darim sham tzrichen lahalos mas v'arnona. That it wasn't about the rent. On some level, of course, they would have to pay rent. It doesn't belong to them, but they would even have to pay the local taxes. Delo tema gzeras hamelech al halavim la'akev otam be'iran. That don't say that it was a responsibility of the Levium to have them in the city, but rather they became residents of the city and would have to pay all the taxes and residential fees that are associated with it. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Meir says, lo hayuma alina lahen skar. You would not. They would not have to pay rental. They would take the viewpoint that Tosfos hints to, that in fact, that if you are that the Levium cities, part of the obligations that the Levium would have in those cities is that they would need to take in anyone who killed by accident. The chozer l'shrara shahayava. Now, if so what is that referring to? You get to return to the position of leadership that you had. So the Rashi explains, imhaya nasi o rosh beis av. If in fact the person who killed by accident was a prince or some kind of av beis din, so then chozer l'gadulaso, he would return to his position after the Kohen Gadol died. When the Kohen Gadol died and he returned home, he would get his position back. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir. So again, Rabbi Yehuda says, no. He would not go back. So it's interesting. Rabbi Meir, in both cases, is very much in favor of the status of the accidental killer, sort of being very forgiving. He doesn't have to pay rent, and he doesn't have to, and he gets his position back. And Rabbi Yehuda is like, no, there are financial consequences. Exactly. So that's the, and it does seem like we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda rather than Rabbi Meir. Okay.
Were you saying that Rabbi Meir was like Tosfos? I didn't.
No, I didn't say that Rabbi Meir was like Tosfos. I gave two interpretations of what it means to provide income to the Levium. One interpretation, Rashi, is that it's talking about rental income, and Tosfos says no, it's not talking about rental income. I mean, of course, there's going to be rental income, but it's even the taxes, even the residential taxes that they would need to pay. So they would need to pay for the repairs of the streets and the repairs of the sidewalks, and they would need to pay, if they had public education, so then they would need to pay for the public education, etc., etc.
So so Tosfos doesn't hold like Rebbe Meir at all. Then Rebbe Meir says they paid nothing, right?
No. Let me be clear. Tosfos is explaining Rabbi Yehuda's viewpoint. Rabbi Yehuda, the question is does Rabbi Yehuda referring to just rental, or is Rabbi Yehuda referring to
Everything else,
to all these taxes?
Right, everything
Now,
else.
once you have what Rabbi Yehuda's viewpoint is, Rabbi Meir's viewpoint is not that. So
Right.
Tosfos is just explaining Rabbi Yehuda's viewpoint.
Okay.
Now, as it turns out, I believe we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, so that's the relevant viewpoint. But it's not. You wouldn't be able to say from Tosfos. Tosfos is explaining the Gemara or explaining the Mishnah, explaining the opinion in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda's position in the Mishnah, not paskening. At least it doesn't seem like it.
But we don't know what the final Pesach is, right? Whether it's like Rashi or Tosfos.
It seems like Rambam holds like Rabbi Yehuda.
No, I'm saying, but which one of those, according to the whether it's
yes. I did not. Correct. I did not double check what the Rambam holds in terms of whether it's rental or also taxes. That I didn't have a chance to check. Okay, so Amar of Kahana Machlokas B'Sheish, that the Machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir with respect to the rental payments is only when it comes to the 6 cities of refuge, the formal cities of refuge, right? Remember that there are 6 formal cities, 3 on the eastern coast side of the Yarden, 3 on the western side of the Yarden, and then there are 42 other Levite cities, the cities of Levium, and those cities also provide refuge. And so, but these 3, and we saw that the difference between them is that if you're in the city of refuge and it's one of the 6 cities of refuge, you could be in there for any reason. You could have walked in there by accident and you will get protection from the city if you were an accidental killer. Whereas the other cities, you have to formally, effectively say that you're there for refuge, and only then will you get the refuge. So that was the difference between them. But according to Rav Kahana, this is only talking about the 6 main cities of refuge. Umar savar lachem l'chol tzarchechem. Again, Rabbi Meir says that it needs to be for you, so therefore it's for all your needs. Aval ba'arba ushtayim. When it comes to the 42 other cities, of course, everybody would have to pay rental income / the taxes. So Amrle Rava says to Rav Kahana, no, havadai lachem l'chol tzarchechem mashma. I would think that when it says lachem with respect to the 6 cities of refuge, it of course means for all your needs. So of course they can't charge rent in those 6 cities. Ella amarava machlokas ba'arboim ushtayim. The machlokas is by the 42 cities. So when it comes to the 6 cities of refuge, of course you get them for free. Of course you get to live there because that you're entitled to live there.
Even according to Rabbi Yehuda?
What?
Even according to Rabbi Yehuda?
Yes, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's exactly right. And Ella Amar Rava Machlokas, the Machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir is only by the 42 cities. Demar Savar va'alehem titnu, right? On them you should give ki hanach leklita, right? That you should give to them means that just in respect to the fact that they would provide protection, refuge. But it doesn't mean that you also have to treat them the same and thereby give them away for free. Umar Savar, no. And Rabbi Meir says, no, when it comes to va'alehem tidnu, on them you should give ki hanach. It's just like the main 6. Ma hanach l'kol tzarchechem, av hani nami l'kol tzarchechem, aval b'sheish divrei hakol lo hayu ma'alin lahen skar. You would not have any rental payment, and there would not be any charges associated with it. Again, I didn't check to see whether Rambam holds like Rashi or Tosfos, but the bottom line is that it does look like the Rambam holds like Rava. So as a result, when it comes to the 6 cities of refuge, the main 6 cities of refuge, you would not be able to charge extra charges, and that they are entitled to live there. And whereas in the 42 other cities, although you can get refuge there, you have to pay rental payments. Okay.
Well, who covers the cost then?
The residents of the city.
So as a tax would be levied on them to cover the cost of the other people. These
Yes, exactly. The Levium who live there would have to pay. Part of the obligation of those Levium is to take care of those who get brought in. Now, again, it's not, you don't have to pay for their food, you don't have to pay for their other things, but basically they're given, and it also doesn't, it's not clear exactly how large a space. I mean, it could be that it's a dormitory space that's given to them.
And more
right?
than one in the space.
Correct, exactly. More than one in the space, exactly. But the bottom line is that it's not sort of a market situation. We're going to guarantee the person living space. So choser l'shrara shahayava. So again, we say that at the end of our Mishnah, we had another machlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about whether or not the person gets their original status back. Tanur Rabbanan, we have a brisa that relates to this topic. So Vishav el mishpachto ve'el achuzas avosav yashuv, right? He shall return. This is referring to a Eved Ivri who, after service for 6 years, goes free, and he gets to return to his family and to the holdings of his ancestors. So mishpachto hushav ve'enu shav. L'masha chaziko avosav, but so this implies. Let's second. So what does he get to return to? Just his mishpacha, but he does not get to return to something that and he gets the land of his ancestors, but he does not get to go back to a position that he held. He does not get to go back to the position that he held. So divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So just as Rabbi Yehuda says with respect to an accidental killer that he doesn't go back, so too he has the same position with respect to an Eved Kanan, an Eved Ivri, excuse me. Rabbi Meir says no. Avhu shav l'masha hechaziku avosav. No, he even goes back to what his ancestors held, meaning to any position, because after all, it says el achuzas avosav. It goes back to his father's, his ancestors' holdings. So ka avosav, just like his ancestors. V'chein begola, and the brisa continues, and the same machlokus applies to Golos. Kishahu omer yashuv, when the Torah tells us that he returns, l'rabos as a rotzeach. It is not just talking about the Eved Ivri, but it's also talking about the accidental killer. So my v'chein begola, what is meant by, and so too in the case of one who's exiled, kedetanya, it's been taught in a brisa, yashav harotzeach el eretz achuzaso, le'eretz achuzaso hushav ve'enu shav l'masha hechaziku avosav divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir Omer av hushav l'masha hechaziku avosav. So the same machlokas as we saw in our Mishnah, we see several different places that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir argue about whether or not a person gets their position back, both in connection with an Eved Ivri and in connection with an accidental killer. So Gamar Shiva Mehasam, and it's through a Gzeira Shava of the word return, which is used both in the context of Eved Ivri and in the context of Galus, of returning from Galus. And so as a result, that is the lesson, and again, it seems like we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, so that you do not get your positions back. But you do get to go home upon the death of the Kohen Gadol. So Hadron Allah Elohein Hagolan, Hadron Allah Elohein Golan, Hadron Allah Elohein Hagolan. So we get now.
It's automatic. Could he earn his position back?
That's a good question. It would seem like he should be able to earn his position back according to Rabbi Yehuda, but I did not have a chance to sort of look into the details of that, but it certainly would seem like it's just that he doesn't get it back automatically. Correct. All right. So now we get to talk about lashes. So the Eluhena Lokin, these are the ones who get Malchus. Haba al achoso, one has relations with one sister. Al achosaviv, whether it's his sister. With his father's sister, or his mother's sister, or his wife's sister, or his brother's wife, and or the brothers of the wives of the brothers of his father, and with a nida. So almana l'kohen gadol, when it comes to and similarly, other cases of malchus are an almana with a kohen gadol. That if she, a kohen gadol is not allowed to marry a widow or a divorcee, and so if he marries a widow, then he's going to get malchus. Gerusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedjit, and a divorcee or a chalutza with an ordinary kohen. Mamzeret unesinas liyisrael. And similarly, a mamzer or a natina is the group of givonim who lied to Yoshua. They made it look like they were coming from far away and that they wanted peace. And so they set up a peace agreement. And then, of course, it turned out that they were actually one of the 7 Canaanite nations. And so they were made into woodcutters and water drawers for the Beis Hamikdash. And so that is, I think, how they got the name Natina. And so so Bais Yisrael and Natina Mamzer, or Mamzer is as somebody who is the produce of a relationship that is prohibited. It's prohibited at a certain level. Almano Grusha. And there's a machlokas about exactly what the level is. Almano Grusha, or a Kohen Gadol who has relations with a widow who is also a divorcee, chayavin ala mishum shnei shemos. That if a Kohen Gadol has relations with a widow who's also a divorcee, so then he's subject to punishment twice. As Rashi says, and Rashi has Nesina, min hagivonim he umalkos mishum lo tichanein bam. That the pasuk in Dvarim that says that we should not marry the Canaanites would apply. And so as a result, if you marry such a person, you are violating that prohibition. And almano grusha, shenis almana meish echad, she became a widow from her first husband, or from one husband, v'nisgarsha meish acher, and she became divorced from another husband, chayav aleh shtei malkos. So as a result, the Kohen Gadol would be subject to 2 lashes. V'shum shtei shemos, because of 2 different psukim. V'shum shtei azharos, and because of 2 different warnings. Sheshtei mefurashos b'mikra, both of them are explicit in the Torah. V'azhara atarbayu kaima, and the warning applies to each of them. And so as a result, they would the Kohen Gadol would get lashed twice. Gerusha,
Isn't that a situation where the Kohen is not forced to divorce, or the Kedushin is chal? We don't force him to divorce. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. We do.
If that's the case, then does he get malchus every day? That he's continuing
No.
married to her?
You ask a great question. I believe we do force them to get divorced, or say that they're required to get divorced. It depends on what authority Beis Din has. I mean, today we don't have the authority to force a divorce, and so but you're asking a great question. I don't know how frequently they're liable, whether you're just liable that first time for having married the person, or every time the person they cohabit, every time they have relations. It would seem like every time they have relations, they would be potentially subject to a penalty of lashes.
Who's going to know that? I mean, it's the privacy of the room.
That's true. So, grusha v'chalutza, when it comes to a divorcee who's also a chalutza, so unfortunately, one of her husbands died without any children, and as a result, and the brothers did chalutza with her. One of the brothers did chalutza with her. So, eino chayav ela mishum achas bilvad. In that situation, divorcee and chalutza are effectively one category, and so you're only subject to lashes once. Right, as Rashi says, grusha v'chalutza, grusha v'hi chalutza, eino chayav ala ela mishum grusha. You're only liable for the grusha. Shahachalutza eino ketuva ela meribuya, maitin law the Betanya the Kedushin. That we saw the Tanya Kedushin, grusha ainly ela grusha, chalutza minayin tam malomar v'isha. So there's a lesson that we learned from the psukim, but it's not explicit in the Torah. And so as a result, you won't get 2 punishments for having relationship with one woman who is both, but rather just one. You'll just get 1 set of lashes. So hatame she'achal as a kodesh, other categories where you get lashes. If a tummy person eats holy foods that are set, from the Beit Hamikdash that were sacrificed. V'haba'el Hamikdash tamei, and then one who enters the Beis Hamikdash when they're tamei. V'ochel chelev, somebody who eats the prohibited fats. V'dam, or eats blood, drinks blood. V'nosar, or has a korban, eats a korban after its time has been expired. Upigul, or had in mind the wrong time with respect to a korban, which makes the korban not good from the first place, and then the person eats it anyway. Vitame, or the food itself became tame and the person eats it. Because if it comes tame, it needs to get burned because it's kodesh. If somebody slaughters an animal as a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash, that's also somebody who's going to get malchus. Va'ochel chametz b'Pesach, or if you eat chametz on Pesach, so I guess that's a daf yomi coincidence since we finished Pesach yesterday. Va'ochel va'osa malacha b'Yom Kippurim, or if you do work on Yom Kippur. Va'mefatem es hashemen, or if you make the shemen hamishcha that you use to anoint the Kohen Gadol, you're not allowed to make that for private use. V'hamifat as a ketoris, or you combine the incense that was used in the Beit HaMikdash, also not allowed to do that. V'hasach b'shemen hamishcha, or if you use that anointing oil for yourself, again, not to anoint a Kohen Gadol. V'ochel nevelos, if you eat a nevelos, utrefos, or a trefa. Nevela is an animal that was not slaughtered properly. A trefa is an animal that was slaughtered properly, but was going to die soon anyway, and so as a result, it's as if on some level, it wasn't slaughtered properly. Shkatzim vermasim, that's creepy crawly creatures. Aval tevel, achal tevel, or if you ate tevel, umaser rishon shalom nitla truma, or you give meiser rishon. Meiser rishon is a tithe that goes to the Levium, which after you've taken it and given to the Levi, anybody's allowed to eat, except that you have to take Trumas Meiser from that. And so if you fail to take Trumas Meiser, if you have anything that's not Truma, that Truma hasn't taken, you're not allowed to eat it. And that is sort of like one category down from Tevel. Tevel is when Truma hasn't been taken at all from it. Umaiser Sheni vehektish, or Truma, Meiser hasn't been, Tevel is where, Tevel is where, the various Trumos and Meisros have not been taken from it. And so both, either Truma or Meiser have not been taken from the original food. Meiser Sheni vehektish shelo niftu. And similarly, if you have Meiser Sheni or other hektish that was not redeemed and not brought to Yerushalayim to be eaten, so then that also is going to result in lashes. So kama yochal min hatevel v'yehechayev. How much do you have to eat to be liable? Rabbi Shimon Omer kolshu, any amount. V'chachamim Omer kizayis. Of course, this is our usual size that we say in an olive amount. That's how much you need to eat. Amar lahem Rabbi Shimon, iatem modim li ba'ochel nimala kolshu shehu chayev. 1 second. You certainly agree with me that eating an ant, a whole ant, which is much smaller than an olive, at least for the vast majority of ants, that is going to make you liable. So if that makes you liable, doesn't that show that you don't have to eat a full kazayas? So Amrulo, they said back to him, no, mibnesha he kivir yata. That's how the item was created. And so as a result, given that the item was created in that form, so that's the size that you have that will make you liable. So Amar Lahen, Rishon responded, well, so too is a single kernel of wheat in the way that it was formed. So he basically says, listen, you don't need to have a kazayas. You can have even just one kernel of wheat, one ant, exactly. So now the Gemara picks up and tries to understand the various categories of what you're obligated. And we're going to end up with 3 viewpoints. We're going to have the Rabbi Yishmael says that you get lashes, whether the obviously there are some things that the punishment itself is lashes. But there are other things that maybe you'll get lashes for. Namely, will you get lashes for kares or something that's misos based in where you don't have, where for whatever reason you can't give the death penalty. So Rabbi Yishmael is going to say you get lashes for everything. Rabbi Akiva is going to say you get lashes only for kares, but not for the death penalty. And Rabbi Yitzchak is going to say, no, you don't get lashes unless it's lashes is the only penalty. So those are the three viewpoints, and it's all based on the concept of kimle b'derabamine, that that you get that we generally say that you get only the most stringent, and so the question is do we count a punishment from heaven, which is kares, and the question is, do we treat lashes as an element of death? That essentially, if lashes are part of the death process, so then maybe we can treat them as treat it all as one. So let's take a look. So chayve krisus katani. We learned that the Mishnah includes various things where you're obligated for kares. So chayve misus based in lo katani. But our Mishnah did not include things where the death penalty is the proper penalty. So Masnisin Mani, who is our Mishnah? Rabbi Akiva. It's Rabbi Akiva. Titania. Based in, according to the first opinion of our brisa, whether you're liable for kares or even if you're subject to death penalty by the court. As we turn to Yud Gimel Amabet, Yeshno Beklal Malkus Arbayim, you are still subject to the 40 lashes. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael. That's Rabbi Yishmael's viewpoint. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chayve Krisos. Yeshno Bechlal Malkus Arbayim, She'im Asu Tshuva, based in Shalmala Mochlin Lahen. So when it comes to kares, because you could be forgiven by God for what you did, because you did tshuva, then there would be a possibility that you would never get punished. So the concept of kimle b'derabamine would never apply. And so therefore, Rabbi Akiva says that we're going to give you lashes if you're subject to kares. But chayve misus based in, eino b'chlal malchus abayim. But those who are subject to the death penalty, you don't get 40 lashes. She'im asu tshuva, ein based in shalmata mochlin lahen. Because when it comes to the death penalty, we know we're going to give you it, because no matter what kind of tshuva you do, you could do all the tshuva in the world. You could get the victim's family to say, no, we believe that this guy should still live. Sorry, Charlie, you are going to be executed. So that is Rabbi Akiva's viewpoint. And again, that's the viewpoint that's consistent with our Mishnah. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer. Sorry?
No, I was thinking in the Mishnah that many of these things that one has relation with a sister, aren't they kari? That's what I was remembering.
Yes, no, you're exactly right. And that's why our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva says kares gets malchus, but none of the things that we mentioned in our Mishnah are subject to misas based in, because that's not Rabbi Yishmael. And Rabbi Akiva says that misas based in, you don't get lashes. And the third viewpoint in this brisa, again, which is not represented in our Mishnah, is Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, chayve krisos b'klal hayu. Chayve krisos is a general statement. V'lama yatzas kares ba'achoso. Why is kares specifically mentioned in connection? Yes. So kares is a general statement, meaning if anybody does any of these things, they're going to get kares. And yet we mention kares specifically with somebody who has relations with his sister. Laduno kares v'lo b'malchus. It means that we're only going to give kares and not lashes. That's why it specifically says. And so as a result, in general, we're going to learn from this one case of the sister, where it says specifically that you get kares, and even though it wasn't necessary, to tell us that whenever you get kares, you do not get malchus. Okay. So my time at the Rabbi Yishmael, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that whether it's misas based in or kares that you're going to get lashes? Diksiv im lo sishmor la'asos as kol divrei haTorah hazos. Right, when it comes to what is subject to lashes, the Torah says, this is in Dvarim Perek Chet Pasuk Nun Chet. It says that if you don't do if you're not careful to perform all the things of this Torah, uksiv v'hifla Hashem es makoska. Hashem will make extra or extraordinary your blows. Hafla zo eno yodea mahi. Now, what is this hafla? Kishahu omer v'hipilu hashofet v'hiko lefanav. So when it says that the judge is going to cast him down, hipilu, which is very similar to a hafla, so as a result, that shows that we're talking about lashes. Havi omer hafla zo malkus he. So we see that hafla is lashes. Uksiv imlosish mor lasos as kol. And we saw that if you don't do anything, any of the mitzvos, you're going to get lashes. Well, I'll say nami. Well, why don't we say that if you don't do a positive commandment, then maybe you should get lashes? Because it says imlo sishmor. It says if you're not watching, sishmor. And the language of shmirah is the failure to do, is to not observe a negative commandment. Rabbi Avin, Amar Rabbi Elai, as it was said by Rabbi Avin in the name of Rabbi Elai. To Amar Rabbi Avin, Amar Rabbi Elai, Kol Makom Shenemar Hishamer Pain Ve'al Einu Ella Lo Saseh. Though the language of Hishamer, Pen, and Al are all situations where the Torah is telling us not to do something. It's a prohibition. So ihachi lav she'ein bo maisanami. Well, then, okay, we've seen, as we saw, I think it was in the first parak, that in fact that we're talking is not considered is a lav she'ein bo maisa, and so we saw that when there is no action in you're violating a negative commandment, speaking lashon hara, etc. So then maybe we would say that you shouldn't get lashes. Or maybe we should say that you should still get lashes because you're still violating a negative prohibition. No, it says la'asot, right? It says imlo sishmor la'asot is the pasuk in Dvarim Parak Kavchet pasuk nun chet. And so you have to have done something. And speaking and similar kinds of situations are not doing something. And so, all right, well, lav shanitach la'aseh nami. Well, why not get lashes even when the prohibition can be undone through a positive commandment, such as stealing, right? If you steal something, there's a positive commandment to return the item, and therefore we don't give lashes for stealing. So no, dumya delav dechasima. This is the key Gemara about this idea that in fact it needs to be similar to the prohibition of muzzling, because muzzling of an animal is, while it's threshing the grain, that prohibition is the prohibition where it refers to lashes. And so as a result, it needs to be that kind of situation, because that's the prohibition in Perek Kavhei Pasuk Dalid, which follows immediately after the law of giving lashes, which is Perek Kavhei Pasuk Gimel in Dvarim. And so as a result, that juxtaposition teaches us that it needs to be like muzzling. Just as muzzling requires an action and doesn't have any possible way of fixing it after the fact, so too, that's true for it's got to have an action, and it's got to be something that cannot be fixed after the fact. So hashta da asis lahachi. Well, one second. Once you've told me that we're talking about muzzling, kulonami, you can learn everything from this muzzling juxtaposition. Dumya delab de chasima. It's got to be a negative commandment, just like chasima is a negative command. You're not allowed to muzzle. It's got to be, it has to be a real action. It can't be something that doesn't involve action. And it has to be something that and it has to, again, we said the first one was positive action. Can't be positive action. It has to be a negative commandment that you're violating. And finally, it has to be something that's a negative commandment that doesn't have some way to fix it. So all three we can learn from the case of muzzle.
Well, what are the three things again? Say that again. So
the three exceptions to where we would get lashes, according to Rabbi Yishmael, are if it's a positive commandment, you don't get lashes for violating a positive commandment. You don't get lashes for violating a negative commandment where there's no action. And you don't get lashes for violating a negative commandment where the Torah explicitly gives you a way to fix the thing.
Well, that's in sort of a form of an action.
Like if he's
Well, that's true. But again, when you have action, you would get lashes. So again, ordinarily, stealing would get you lashes. It's
Right.
not, but because the Torah specifically commands us to return something if you steal, so as a result, we're not going to give lashes for stealing. Okay, Rabbi Akiva Omar, my time. So what? So that now we understand Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael only excludes the light items. He doesn't exclude, once you get to lashes and more severe, all of them get lashes. But Rabbi Akiva doesn't go that far. He excludes, of course, he's going to exclude exactly the same lenient situations, but he's going to include, but he's also going to exclude the death penalty situations. For Rabbi Akiva, my timer, kadei rishaso. It's all according to his wickedness. My mishum risha achat atamachayvo. You can only punish him for one wickedness, meaning you only give one punishment. You're not going to punish him for two. Rabbi Yishmael, Hani Mili Misa v'Mamon. And Rabbi Yishmael, why doesn't Rabbi Yishmael hold this same principle? So he doesn't hold that principle because he holds that principle only applies to death and money, o malchus umamun, or lashes and money. Aval misa umalchus, but when it comes to death and lashes, misa arichtahi. Well, that's just giving one long death penalty. The lashes come first, obviously, because otherwise the person's dead. The lashes come first. You lash the person, then you go ahead and kill him. And it's as if it was one long process to kill the guy. And so as a result, Rabbi Yishmael would apply even in the death penalty situation, whereas Rabbi Akiva says no in that situation. Well, Rabbi Akiva, ihachi chayv krisus nami. Well, 1 second.
And why would he need to do it? If a person is sentenced to death, whether it's chenek or whatever it is, then why would it be necessary to give the person lashes?
Because they deserve it, because they violated a Torah prohibition.
But they're going to get the death penalty.
You're absolutely right. But Rabbi Yishmael says that any negative commandment is violating of a negative commandment is going to get lashes unless it is excluded based on the principle of chasima, of muzzling. That when it comes to chasima, it's got to be not a negative commandment. It's got to have an action, and it's got to have no method of positive response. And any death penalty action is going to fulfill those requirements. And so he doesn't have an exception for Kimle b'derabamine, the way Rabbi Akiva does. Rabbi Akiva applies it not only between monetary and non-monetary penalties, punishments, but also even within non-monetary punishments. So as a result, death penalty and malchus, we're only going to apply the most strict. Well, Rabbi Akiva, well, why don't we say that when you're subject to the kares, that's also subject to two penalties, and therefore we should only give them the most severe, and that would be kares, and therefore no lashes. Shim asu my amrat shim asu tshuva hasha mias lo abde. But if they it's saying, and my amrat sheim asu tshuva, and you want to tell me that, well, maybe as Rabbi Akiva said in our Mishnah, that maybe they're going to do repentance, and as a result they won't be subject to kares. Hashtamias lo avdi. They haven't yet done tshuva, so as a result, maybe we should still apply the principle of kimle b'derabamine and not apply malchus. So I'm Rabbi Abahu. The Ferish Ribsa Torah Chayve Krisus Lamalkus. No, the Torah explicitly causes us to think that kares sins are also going to get lashes. The Gamar La'ene, because we have a lesson of Ene Mila Einecha from eye. So there's basically a Gzera Shava that we have La'ene in connection with V'nichrasu La'ene B'nei Amam in Vayikra Parakaf Pasuk Yud Zayin, that the sinners will be cut off before the eyes of their people. And when it comes to lashes in Parakaf Hey Pasuk Gimel, it says of Dvarim, it says V'nikla Achicha Le'inecha, that you're going to demean, your brother's going to be demeaned before your eyes by lashing him. And so that, or that you can't give him extra lashes. But the idea of Einei and Einecha shows that there's going to be a connection between the two, which teaches that just as we give malchus, where those are subject to malchus, we're also going to give malchus to those who are subject to kares. So Maskiv la Rabbi Abba bar Mamul ihachi chayve misus based in nami nigmerem. While why not make a similar gzeira shava with respect to people who are subject to the death penalty? Because me'ene, we have the word ene there, because it said in Bamidbar Perek Tesvav Pasuk Kav Dalid in Parsha Shlach. If somebody does something and it was done by mistake, so the point is ene, but the point this is dealing with somebody who engages in a death-based sin. And so as a result, maybe we should say that they are also going to be subject to lashes for the same reason, based on the same similar kind of gzeira shava. So no, the response is done in le'ene mile'enecha, ve'ein done in me'ene mile'enecha. No, me'ene is different from le'ene. Le'ene is much more similar to le'enecha, or at least that was the tradition that we had, that those two connect. And we don't have the tradition of me'ene and le'enecha. So umay nafkamina, what difference does it make? So v'had tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, v'shav hakohen uvah hakohen. What difference does it make that you have a different wording? We could do a gzeira shava based on Shav HaKohen and Ba HaKohen. Those, the Shav and the Ba, are completely different. And yet, Zohi Shiva Zohi Bia. There's returning and coming. And yet, we make a Gzeira Shava between those two phrases. And as a result, learn out laws associated with that in connection. I believe it's with respect to Mitzora, with respect to various things associated with Saras. Let me see if it says, right? Yes, with respect to Saras. So as a result, so that's Va'od, Ligmor Me'ene, Le'ene. Moreover, both Ene and Me'ene and Le'ene, the last four letters are identical. So Daha Gamor Le'ene Mile'enecha, and that's closer, and then Le'ene and Le'enecha. So the Gemara answers, so Kibla Mina Amine Rabbi Shmuel Bari Rabbi Yitzchak. So all right, you've disproved our first effort, but rather we're going to say Kidei Risha So. Again, it's based on the phrase Kidei Risha So. Mishum Risha Achas Atamachayvo Ve'i Atamachayvo Mishum Shtei Rishayos. Birisha HaMesura LeBeistin HaKasam Medaber. When it says that you have to have one penalty and not two penalties, it's not talking about in the global context of two penalties where God is giving one of the penalties. It's only saying that we will only give one penalty when both the penalties are being administered by the court. When both the penalties are being administered by the court, then we'll only give one penalty. But kares doesn't count because it's not administered by the court. And therefore you do get lashes. All right. So that was quite a piece. We will pick up, God willing, from there, from as Rava is going to give a different explanation for the machlokus between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva about why it is that Rabbi Akiva says that the death penalty is not subject to lashes, where Rabbi Yishmael says that it is. But for that, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful day.
What? So tell me again the difference between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael regarding karet and Makkot. It just
no worries. Here we go. So, according to Rabbi Yishmael, whether you're subject to lashes, whether the Torah tells you that you're subject to lashes, to kares, or even mises based in, you're going to get lashes. All three. According to Rabbi Akiva, you only get lashes for if it's the Torah says you get lashes, or if you're subject to kares.
If you're subject to kares, I thought that was Rabbi Yishmael's position. No.
Well, the Rabbi Yishmael agrees that you get kares. Well, they disagree about mises based in alone. They only disagree about mises based in. According to Rabbi Yishmael, mises based in is subject to lashes. According to Rabbi Akiva, mises based in is not subject to lashes.
But there was a monetary issue as well, right? With Rabbi Akiva, right? Didn't
both Rabbi Akiva and and Rabbi Yishmael hold of the principle of kimle b'derabba mineh. We only apply the most severe punishment. The question is whether that applies only between money and physical punishment, or even within physical punishment. According to Rabbi Yishmael, it applies only between monetary and physical punishment, but it won't apply between lashes and death. And so as a result, you'll give lashes first and then you'll kill the guy. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, no, the principle of kimle b'derabba mineh, we apply the most severe punishment, applies both between monetary and non-monetary penalties and between two different non-monetary penalties, namely lashes and death. That when we have death on the line, when death is the punishment, we will not also give lashes. And so the only area of disagreement, the only disagreement between them in terms of application is death penalty convicts. Death penalty convicts, according to Rabbi Yishmael, get lashes. Death penalty convicts, according to Rabbi Akiva, do not.
That's mitat bidei beitin, right?
Correct. Mitzas b'dei beitin.
But if it's mitat derech shemayim, that means karet, then Rabbi Yishmael would hold
yes lashes, and Rabbi Akiva would hold yes lashes.
And so Rabbi Akiva would also hold lashes.
Correct.
I see. So it's only mitat bidei beitin that there's a difference. And
correct.
Regarding the monetary penalties,
they would agree that if they're monetary penalties and death penalty or lashes, we are only going to give one of them. We are not going to give, we're only going to give the non-monetary payment penalty, namely lashes or the death penalty, and there will be no monetary payment.
And lashes is considered more severe than monetary.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, when you do damage to somebody, we generally say that you pay damages, and only if it's not shava pruta do we give you lashes. So it's not completely clear that there's a strict rule as to which is more severe, money or lashes. In fact, it may be that money is more severe than lashes, but less severe than death.
No, if it's a $50 million penalty, that would seem to be that money is more severe than lashes, right?
Yes, that's exactly 100%.
But the person still gets lashes in that case.
Not again. It's not clear. It's not clear because, again, if you go up to somebody and you drive into him with a car and cause tremendous pain and suffering, etc., you're subject to, if you were to do it and have caused less than a shava pruta worth of damage, you would get lashes because you hurt some, you caused a wound on purpose and you were warned, etc. And so you would get lashes in that situation. But if you did all of that and you caused real physical payment requirements, well, then the Torah says that you have to pay for that. You don't get lashes. We're not going to give you an escape with lashes.
So it isn't always that there isn't always the case that lashes supersedes the monetary payment then.
Correct.
But in the cases where it does, they would both agree, Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva, that lashes supersedes.
And what they're really agreeing to is that you're not going to have to do both. That's what they're agreeing to. They agree that you don't have to do both pay money and get lashes. You're not going to have both of those happen. That's what they're agreeing to.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.